who are no longer with us. First of all, I would like to mention John Killeen, Linenhall Library, who would have been a succeeding colleague of John Gray's. John died there in the last month or two, and he was an interviewee in this film. So I'd like to, if people would keep John in their thoughts and memories. Also, Marilyn Heidman of Northern Visions Television, who I collaborated with the making of this film, and her collaboration was vital to making this document of 1792 and all that, which is such a vital part of our history in Belfast. She was vital to making that happen. And again, I would ask you to keep her in your memory. And also, look, this is a solemn day for our common European home. So let's hope that the outcome of today's news is not prolonged, and that we do find there's a solution found to the problems on our continent. So anyway, on that note, I'll say a few words after the film, and I'll let Stephen kickstart the film Belfast 1792, The Hub of the Harp. Thank you very much, Gordon Maggott.
In July 1792, 11 harpers attended the city. The assembly rooms in Belfast, or the exchange rooms as they were also known, that building had a tremendous cultural significance. Wolfe Toll, Henry Joy McCracken. Since these gentlemen had a great insight and they had a great foresight into preserving these old dying melodies.
What was an impetus to them to decide to bring together as many of the harpers as they could?
They were aware of the beauty that was dying out. It wasn't just an irrelevant enigma that was on its last legs. There was something beautiful there. They wanted to preserve it.
The late 18th century is a period in which a new romanticism is in the ascendant, and also an antiquarianism. Belfast is a small town. 1790 is a population of 20,000 compared with Dublin, population of 250,000. What's extraordinary about Belfast is, despite its small size, it was arguably the most radical centre in the British Isles.
The town of Belfast was relatively a small town, but it was growing. And it did, in cultural terms, punch above its weight. Now we find it difficult sometimes to realise how culturally developed it was. That a generation and then further generations of townspeople were addressing all aspects of life. Political life, obviously, in the 1790s was fraught.
It was an overwhelmingly Presbyterian town, and that's part of the key to that. A Presbyterian community that was excluded from political power. We accept that the Catholic majority on the island were utterly excluded from political power. We tend to forget that Presbyterians were excluded too, and in the late 18th century, they were prospering. And it's actually rising people like that when continuously excluded from power who become dangerous radicals. And in a British and Irish context, that is what the majority of the population of Belfast became.
The Linenhall Library was founded on the 13th of May, 1788. And there was a local instance of a widespread Irish, British, European, North American movement for self-improvement through the establishment of educational institutions, museums, and libraries. The library did predate the Harpers Festival of 1792, but in real terms, it was instrumental in organising the Harpers Festival of 1792. A number of the founding members were very interested in all aspects of Irish culture, music being one of those.
Ireland had legends and had a language and had a music that was real, just surviving, just hanging on. And so you get, and very often these Northern Presbyterians saying, well, hang on a minute, there's something invaluable here that has to be rescued, preserved. You've got this combination of romantic and antiquarian inclinations and a new radical impetus. After all, the emblem of the United Irishmen was the harp re-strung.
From the 17th century onwards, classical music had firmly arrived throughout the world. Ireland was successfully conquered by England. And the people in the big houses, they had a great fondness for anything that was European, but in particular, anything that was Italian. Italian art, Italian music, Italian fashion. That was the be-all and end-all. You could point to certain characters in history, in musical history, who, if you like, were to blame for this, or who started it, depending on which viewpoint you have. But one particular candidate would be Arcangelo Corelli. Now, Corelli, he is accredited to have been the master of classical music. Those old harping melodies, they were considered to be related to certain things in Irish life, antiquated, associated with poverty, disassociated with any form of personal progress in life. So why would people identify with this when they had this new modern march of Corelli and classical music, and their aspirations were ennobled by the Europeans? They were made to be embarrassed by the music of their own country. Unfortunate is the word.
The ancient music of Ireland wasn't written down and was in danger actually of being lost because it was carried in the heads of itinerant harpers.
The Irish harpers played not really what we would think of as traditional, as folk music nowadays. Their music is traditional, meaning that they did it in a consistent way for an awfully long time. But it wasn't at all folk music, it was art music. So the harper had his position at a Gaelic chieftain or king's court and played sophisticated art music for a sophisticated courtly audience. And this carried on. I suppose its heyday was maybe into the 16th century. Then, due to all the political troubles from the 1600s onwards, that whole tradition went into decline.
And towards the end of the 18th century, as patronage waned, these harpers basically had a very hard time. And as they died, and many of them died in poor circumstances, the music died. Dr. James MacDonald of the Glens was very important in the organisation of the Harpers Festival. Henry Joy, Robert Bradshaw, these people were, movers and shakers, as we would term them now, in Belfast society.
I suppose you could consider them today to be, to use a modern term, a part of an elite, the great and the good. They had influence in the city, but they also had a foresight. And the foresight was to preserve these melodies. Why? Because they're going to be lost.
This is the end of a wonderful, long-lived courtly tradition.
So that was an impetus to them in 1791 to decide to bring together as many of the harpers as they could. Very important step in Irish musicology.
this revival of Irish things, the language, the music, fitted in terribly well with that impetus right back to the 1770s to assert rights for the Irish Parliament. The Assembly of the Harpers was a centerpiece in a whole program in July 1792. I mean, the other element was the review of the volunteer movement, something that was done every year, but this was an attempt to revive the volunteer movement as a putative national guard on the French Revolutionary model.
The European philosophers were writing about liberty, about equality, about fraternity, and the people of France, of course, they wanted to put these ideas into practice. So we had the revolution in France, and these theories, these ideologies, they spread throughout Europe. Ireland was no exception.
The harpers, the elderly harpers, you know, the last possible assembly of many of these harpers, were being knitted into the new politics, as so many hoped, of 1792.
I started the Historical Harp Society of Ireland to promote the early Irish harp. None of what we do would be possible had the Belfast Harpers meeting not taken place in 1792. The wonderful thing that they did was to have Edward Bunting note down the music that the harpers were playing. And by many miracles, of course, his manuscripts have survived. And therefore, everything that we do as an organization nowadays is based on the work of one teenager, one 19-year-old in 1792.
And if you could imagine at that time, 11 harpers in a room, and Bunting, who was a master at notation, a young man. I've been teaching music for a long time. Some people, it would take them maybe 10 years to get to that stage. But he was 19, you must remember at the time. You could imagine the scenario. What's your name? Dennis Hampson. What's the tune you're going to play? The Dawning of the Day. Go. And he would notate these. Next. What's your name? Arthur Neill. What tune are you going to play? The Green Woods of True. The Green Woods of what? Oh, it doesn't matter. I'll write it down phonetically. All right? Play the tune. And he did this with the other harpers.
Bunting, of course, was absolutely crucial to our knowledge of what actually happened in 1792, the transcription of the music. The first publication in score form of Irish traditional music. I mean, the publication by the Belfast Library, today's Linenhall Library, in 1796 of the music based on Bunting's transcriptions in 1792.
The publication of Bunting's ancient Irish music, I think, is what we would now call a legacy of that involvement, because for the first time, a collection of the ancient music was published, and it inspired Edward Bunting to really spend the rest of his life collecting more of the music. And in 1809, he published his second volume, and in 1840, he published his third volume. And those volumes were tremendously important in codifying what was there as part of our culture but had not been written down. But we in the Linenhall own a very rare, if not unique, 1811 printing of Bunting's music. And this will bring new work to new audiences and really celebrate the importance to Irish musicology of Bunting's music and the role that the Linenhall Library played in bringing that to a modern audience. In 1808, the Irish Harp Society, or the Belfast Harp Society, was founded. In our membership register, we see that Edward Bunting joined this library on St. Patrick's Day, 1808, which I think is very appropriate.
We're in the oldest, or at least in terms of the site, the oldest church in Belfast. I mean, St. George's as the corporation church, its history goes right back to the original plantation at the beginning of the 17th century, although the structure, I think, is broadly 18th century. But it certainly precedes St. Anne's Church, later cathedral. So it's a very appropriate place to talk about harp music. And of course, Edward Bunting was organist here, so.
Here in Ireland, I'm very keen to promote the early Irish harp. This is a very special instrument because it has an almost 1,000-year history. We know that it was played before 1000 and it died out in the years after 1800. The very special characteristics of this harp and the thing which differentiates it from European harps is that the strings on the continent and as close as Wales were made from things like gut or horsehair in Wales, for example. But in these islands, in Ireland and the Highlands and Islands of Scotland, the string material was metal, usually brass wire, but perhaps also precious metals like silver and maybe even gold. So you have a medieval instrument, a very robust medieval instrument with a one-piece sound box. So the kind of instrument where, if you like, it's a bit like a dugout canoe. You dig out the back of your resonating chamber and put a backplate on it with metal strings, played for most of its history by fingernails. So with use of a damping technique then, as well as a playing technique, because it's so resonant. So a very different instrument to the continental instruments of the period. I have about 25 students around the country in Dublin, Galway, Cork, and Waterford. And so I'm trying to build up a group of players who will be the next generation of teachers.
First of all, I'd like to welcome you all here to Míle Fáilte Romhaibh to celebrate the 220th anniversary of the 1792 Belfast Harpers Assembly. When I started reading on the Belfast Harp Society, what I found that there was something amiss. There seemed to be this collective celebration of the activities of the great and the good at the time, but very little significance was put on to the people who I think should have taken real centre stage, and that is the musicians. Arthur O'Neill, he was born in the townland of Drumnastrad, near Dungannon, County Tyrone, in the year 1734. When only 2 years of age, he accidentally suffered an injury to his right eye. This accident, together with subsequent cures, rendered him totally blind. Arthur's parents sent their 10-year-old son to Owen Keenan in Otter, County Tyrone, to learn to play the harp. After 5 years tuition from Owen Keenan, as a young teenager, he began what was to be a long life as a wandering bard. Along with his guide, he spent most of his adulthood traveling the island of Ireland, where he would be lauded, scorned, praised and ignored by both the nobility and the not so noble alike.
Arthur's significance is that not only did he take part in the Harpers meeting along with 9 other Irish harpers, but that he was employed afterwards in the attempts around 1800. Much like ourselves with the Historical Harp Society now, there was this major attempt in the years after the Harpers meeting to teach young people how to play this instrument.
O'Neill, out of all the harpers, was chosen by the Belfast Harp Society, which was formed in 1808 in Lynn's Hotel in Castle Street in Belfast. They decided that out of them all, this man had enough erudition, enough knowledge of the language, enough knowledge of Irish history, enough knowledge of the old modal airs, and he also was a very impassioned man on all those subjects. So of all the harpers in Ireland, they decided this is the man that we want as our professor for our school. So they installed him in Cromick Street in Belfast, which was, I would call that area the hub of the harp. A lot of harp-related activity went on in that area.
His significance as a teacher is enormous because he taught some people who played until well into the 1840s. So he helped the instrument survive a little bit longer than it otherwise would have.
After some small years living in Cromick Street in Belfast, when the shine had gone off, the Harp Society sort of ignored him. Now, I had to dig deep. I revisited the original sources as close as it could get to them. What I found was absolutely startling, to say the least. What I found was a man, an old, erudite man, abandoned, left to fend for himself. There were people writing letters into the Belfast Commercial Chronicle and the Belfast Newsletter who were frankly terrified to disclose their own names when they were writing these letters complaining about the Harp Society's treatment of O'Neill and the neglect of O'Neill. That needs to be recorded. I wanted Bunton re-glorified, I wanted MacDonald re-glorified, the United Irishmen, Wolfe Tone, Henry Joy McCracken, etc. Likewise, but I also want the other side of the story to be told, and that should be platformed on the same level. So in considering the light and the darkness, we find the truth. The truth lies somewhere in between. Arthur, without pomp, without ceremony, quietly left Belfast. His health was in tatters, but his honour was intact. He died in the townland of Knocknacray, which is part of what is now Maydown, County Armagh, on October 29th, 1816, at the age of 82. He was buried in Eglish Churchyard. National Gallery in Dublin, because I had already came across a reference of a Cornelius O'Donnell from Larkfield in County Leitrim who had painted an image of O'Neill. So I was wondering, did the National Gallery have that? They got back to me and said they had, and they sent me an image of this, and it was a black and white image. So I thought, that needs to come to Belfast. He had very little connection with Dublin. He needs to come back to Belfast in some shape or form. So what better way than a painting? I sent an email off to a gentleman in England called Stephen Burgess. And within a day or two, he came back to me and he said, send me an image. So I sent him the black and white image of O'Neill, including some particulars collected from Bunting's collections about O'Neill's fondness for his red hand buttons, which are not in the original, not featured in the original black and white image that I got from the National Gallery. So within a month, the postman arrives, knocks at the door and says, here's a painting for you. I was absolutely thrilled and delighted. One email, 1 month, done. O'Neill back in Belfast.
The ghosts of the 1790s, I believe, are always with us. They play almost a subliminal part in our day-to-day work, in that we realise the importance of what our founder members did, what Edward Bunting did, and that we use as an inspiration as we go forward.
What I would like to see is an annual celebration of the first Belfast Harpers Assembly in 1792. I mean, it confounds me as to why there isn't one every year. Why not have the Belfast Harpers Assembly in the original place it was held?
I think there's an enormous amount of work waiting to be done. We need PhD research students working hard on the manuscripts and on the surviving repertoire. We need people building the instrument, and at the Harp Society, we've started to support instrument builders here in Ireland to build these instruments.
What I would like to see is people standing up proud and taking an ownership of the beauty of their melodies again. Because from my personal opinion, although it be biased, but many composers in Europe have backed this opinion up, I think it's probably the best music in the world.
The group the weekend, their Oma group from Donegall, the Donegall Centre in Oma. It's muted itself, right?
Okay, can you hear me now? Yep. Okay, dead on. Cheers.
Okay. There's always a problem with the technology, but anyway, yes, I showed the film for Kiltotas Erin in the Donegall, from the Donegall Centre in Oma on Saturday, and so this is the second time this week I've come to do this, and I've learned actually for people from far and near who aren't so familiar with Belfast, the group I'm actually speaking to in an old church here, St. Joseph's, is they reclaim the Enlightenment, sometimes not to be confused with RTE, but and for an Enlightenment group, they have a great habit of meeting in churches, which is quite interesting. But apart from that, which I find enjoyable because it's great to speak in these a noble building like this. I'll just say a few words because I'm conscious that people have watched almost half an hour of a film. The whole thing surrounding 1792 kicked off in 1992. In some ways, it was part of the Belfast mythology. I think every person of a certain age had heard of the Harpers and this place in the centre of Belfast where the old Harpers had met. But it wasn't until 1992, the bicentenary, that there was a real sense of what had happened in that building. And I was in Brussels for a long time, and it's not to be confused with 1992, that only people of technocratic and bureaucratic inclination know about the single market. It was created then with Jacques Delors. But no, it was like Janet Harbinson was a lady at that stage who was very famous in terms of harp activism and keeping the memory of 1792 alive. And she deserves credit for organising a major commemoration in the Ulster Hall, one of the famous venues in Belfast. And Derek Bell, late Derek Bell of the Chieftains, performed in at that. So it was almost until another 20 years later, another generation started taking up the gauntlet. Eugene Dunphy, he did some research on Art O'Neill, a fellow Tyrone man like himself, and also Nola Brawley, who is an Irish language barrister in Dublin. She's from near Dungiven in County Derry. She's a harp player, quite a well-known harp player, and she did some particular research into the Hempson harp. And Dennis Hempson, who was the oldest musician at the Harpers Festival, I think he was actually 95, and to be 95 in 1792 and having lived an itinerant lifestyle is quite a phenomenal achievement. So that kind of kickstart the fresh round of interest in 1792. And of course, Eugene Dunphy and myself were old school friends. We went to the Christian Brothers School in Belfast, and we had gone, and Eugene had been away playing music around the world for about 20 years. I'd been working in Brussels as a journalist for 20 years, and we came back and collided in a library in North Belfast, and we started the conversation about the Harpers. So out of that came the combination of Eugene's research and my journalistic background. We started collaborating, and I had already set up a small community interest company called InforStructure Forum. So it was essentially the umbrella for the film project. And the only support we received was some technical support from Northern Visions. And as I say, the late Marilyn Heidman was the person that facilitated that. In 2016, Colleen Rose McCabe, a young musician that had attended the 220th anniversary in the Central Library in Belfast, she played a recital in St. George's Church, the church that John Gray mentioned in the film, where Bunting was the organist. Edward Bunting had been the organist there, and he was the character that had notated the music at the Harpers Festival, the 18th century version of recording. So shortly after Colleen, then again, as I mentioned, Donegall and Waring, they formed a collaboration, cross-community organisation with the Ulster Scots Agency, and have for the last 4 or 5 years been organising a festival in the memory of Edward Bunting, and have kindly asked me to show the film at that most years. Eugene Dunphy has also come in on that and has been obviously flying the flag of the Harpers and people like Art O'Neill. But anyway, I could go on and on. I've come here tonight and learned, I found out there's some breaking news which actually warms the cockles of my heart. I can't quite believe the news that I received here tonight. It was basically the reason why this film was made. in many respects. It seems almost as if a long journey is over. I thought we were, well, I am not going to count any chickens yet, but the news that I received here tonight is extraordinarily heartwarming. It seems that the film, which is now about 8 years old, it's starting to age a bit. If it was a dog, it would be almost halfway through its life. It would be middle age. So basically the film has, I think, effectively done its job. It has rallied the forces. It has stimulated interest. And it's in speaking to groups like this, it's a great honor to see that something has emerged out of it, that the interest isn't just going to go away again for another 200 years. But there were a few bumps along the road. There still are. I can't be complacent. Before the COVID period began, there was still is a major redevelopment plan for the north side of the city centre, which is the historic heart of Belfast. And under that plan, the assembly rooms would be turned into a boutique hotel. And I remember speaking to John and some other people a few years back about that. And I think we were just collectively horrified by the thought of a boutique hotel, the cheek of turning it into a boutique. My goodness, it was horrific. But I think maybe that may have acted as another rallying. I better not use the word troops. It's not a good thing to be talking about on a day like this. But anyway, things do seem to be moving. I will just finish up by just adding my tuppence worth into the rallying call, to the cry for honouring the history of Belfast, the musical and heritage history of this island, the music, the ancient tunes of Ireland. I would like to see the assembly rooms, and as I say, I'm adding my voice to that of RTE, the Reclaim the Enlightenment, who I learned tonight are joined forces with the Historical Harp Society based in Kilkenny, not quite the Confederacy of Kilkenny, but the redoubtable Siobhan Armstrong, who was another one of the interviewers in the film. And they're going to have some form of a revival of the festival this coming July. And there are also moves surrounding the building, but I don't want to elaborate too much, but the pointers are good. That was against the background of the City Council having given outline planning permission in September 20th, 2020 to actually give the go-ahead to the major development that would have actually turned the assembly rooms into a boutique hotel. So I will just conclude by adding my manifesto for what I would like to see happen. I hope the RTE here, my friends and colleagues in RTE, Reclaim the Enlightenment, embrace this into their coming plans and into the discussions that open up with Kilkenny and the community of stakeholders. I presume the Donegall Centre in Omagh and the Linenhall Library and all the whole community of stakeholders, I hope, rally round. Also here, the City Council is adopting, there's positive soundings there, which really is good. But what I would like to see is genuine cultural tourism generated by the protection and proper use of listed property. The Assembly Rooms, an historical and cultural gem, is the oldest public building in Belfast. It would be a catastrophe if it were to become anything other than a shared exhibition and performance space where the story and the spirit of the Harpers Assembly, Jonathan Swift's time in Belfast, and the revolutionary fervour of the 18th century Belfast could all be animated and enjoyed in an 18th century salon-like ambience. So, as I say, I've added my bit to my colleagues here in St. Joseph's in Sailorstown, Belfast. And I leave tonight hoping that the film that you have seen becomes an historical document and will be enjoyed by historians and antiquarians in the decades ahead. Thank you very much. Gur míle magat.
Thanks very much. I think your film, apart from the fact that I was in it, I'd have cut that bit out, but I think your film's worn very well.
Sorry?
I think your film's worn very well.
Thank you very much indeed, John. Thank you.
Okay, we'll just switch this off now. Okay. Thank you all for coming tonight.